Everybody, what's going on, and welcome to GNR Central. And today I want to cover a story I've been meaning to do for a really long time, and that's how Matt Sorum ended up joining Guns N' Roses. Now, you guys all know that he was with the Cult, and he played with the Cult before he joined Guns N' Roses, and that's kind of where Duff and Slash had kind of become familiar with him. So according to Slash's book, Steven Adler had just been fired, and he said once we'd exhausted all logical possibilities, I for one was not going to let the hunt for the drummer and for the band. So Duff, Izzy, and I racked our brains. We discussed the best drummers we'd seen lately, but nobody basically appropriate came to the mind until one night I had an epiphany. I recalled seeing the Cult a few months before at the Universal Amphitheater and being mesmerized by their drummer. He was effing amazing. I was standing at the soundboard and was completely captivated by his playing. I didn't pay attention to the rest of the band at all for the whole gig. His playing was extremely tight, and the sound had this enormous presence. It was big, bombastic, and delivered with intense authority. And the moment I remembered him, I couldn't believe that I had sat through so many shitty auditions without realizing that I knew the right guy. Mike Klink, our producer, had worked with Matt Sorum, the drummer in question, so I called him immediately and left him a message. A little later, I was a bit drunk, lying on my back, my head hanging upside down on the edge of Renee's bed, watching the phone on the floor and waiting for it to ring. Finally it did, and I picked it up instantly. "Hello?" Mike said in his typically soft-spoken voice. "Hey, it's Slash," I said. "So listen, do you know the drummer from the Cult? We need a drummer, and I saw this guy, and he's great. I'm trying to find out if he's available." "Well, I don't know," Mike said. "Let me make a phone call." "Okay." So the phone rang up in the early evening. "Slash," Mike said. "Here's what I found out. He's possibly available. Do you have a pen? I have his number." So Slash would end up calling Matt Sorum and asking him if he's interested to come audition. So about 2 days later, Matt came in to rehearse, and within the course of 2 or 3 songs, Duff, Izzy, and I realized we'd found our man. We'd basically found ourselves a player with an intimate feel on his own, both in step and with the rest of us, and individually stylized. He had the power, the chops, and the vibe to fill the void and to add what the band's sound was about to become. I think Duff and I took Matt out to ask him if he wanted to join. I can't remember where, probably the Rainbow. But we took him out and drank and did some blow, that kind of thing. He fit right in. He was psyched. It was a situation that every touring musician dreams of. There's no easier gig to walk into for a real rock and roll player. After hanging out with Duff and me, it was clear that Matt thought that Guns was the biggest band in the face of the planet, as well as the crew of relentless partiers. And the pay was good, and there was no rules except for one. But all you had to do was play well. But even then, Matt still had to learn a hell of a lot. There was about 36 songs the band had to rehearse. We had demos of 36 songs that we planned to record for the albums, and since those tapes weren't really enough to go on, Duff, Izzy, and I had to teach him everything in a reasonably short amount of time, and because of that, the rest of the band had to become very professional very quickly, and there was a lot of remorse, at least on my part, and surely the other guys, about letting Steven go, but when Matt came in, he brought new life to the proceedings. There was a light at the end of the tunnel when it looked it might be dark forever. So later on, Slash in his book said that Matt was great. He was tight with Duff and me. Izzy was around, but not like he used to be. Not only was he 100% dead sober, he was also very much anti-alcohol and anti-drugs at this point. And when Izzy met Matt, they got along fine, but it was under the condition that the decision had already been made. It was all okay, but I think Izzy felt dictated to, and he hated that. So the first recording that we did with Matt was Knocking on Heaven's Door for the Days of Thunder soundtrack, which also ended up on the Illusions albums. I remember doing the solo for it on somewhere, and I used my 58 Gibson Explorer, and it was an amazing take. I just ran in there with my girlfriend and some friends in tow, picked up the guitar and really let the solo sing. I turned the tone down on the bass pickup, I locked it in and let it scream basically. I really loved the way that one came out. It was very emotional yet effortless. And Knocking on Heaven's Door was also the first song that we could listen to and get an idea of what the band sounded like with our new drummer. It came out great, but there was a definite difference in the overall feel of the new Guns from the old Guns, and we lost a little bit of that mayhem and punk rock, that rock chaotic, seat-of-the-pants feel. Instead, we sounded more epic and solid and huge, and that was good or a bad thing depending on who you asked. In my opinion, I was just happy to be moving ahead. Next, we went in and Matt learned all 36 songs at breakneck speed, basically playing them with us live because there was no other material to reference. So you guys may be wondering, because Matt Sorum was already in the Cult, did it create any bad blood between the members of the Cult and Guns N' Roses because Matt kind of switched bands and they kind of asked Matt to join without even talking to the members of the Cult? Here's what Slash had to say in a 1992 interview.
Quick question before we jump into the many phone calls that we have. When you went and saw the Cult and you thought, okay, Matt will be a great drummer, what was Ian Astbury and Billy Duffy of the Cult's reaction?
Actually, I just ran into them like 2 days ago. They were really cool about it because, of course, I called Matt on the sly. You know, I didn't call Ian and say, "Can I steal your drummer?" But I called Matt and said, "Well, you know, do you want to do the album?" You know, I didn't really tell him I wanted to steal him for the whole tour and everything. So he was like, "Well, the Cult's off the tour and the record's done and so on. So, yeah, I'll come down." And we clicked, you know, in the first 5 minutes. So then it was like, well, we're obviously not going to replace him. You know, we did the whole record and everything. So we made him an offer
That he couldn't refuse.
You know, right? I didn't say that. You did. And so as far as Ian and Billy were concerned, that was Matt's deal, really, to confront them with it. And then as time went by, running into Billy and Ian, I mean, well, Ian was great about it. I didn't really talk to Billy about it, you know, but Ian was like, you know, whatever, it's cool, you know. So it was amicable.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Okay.
So Matt Sorum would end up shedding some light on what those sessions were like for the Illusions records. He said, "We'd start at noon and the work ethic was cool. There was a lot of alcohol around, but the heroin thing had definitely subsided at that point. Slash had quit, Izzy had quit, and we were dabbling in cocaine and partying rituals. And it was candlelight in the studio. You'd look and there'd be Sean Penn and Bruce Springsteen hanging out, and supermodels like Naomi Campbell and Elle Macpherson. It was like a Fellini movie, but it never really was cool to do a lot of drugs in front of Axl. Even though he'd been on some pills, I did some coke with him once and he talked for about 10 effing hours. I never did coke with him again, but the sessions became more drawn out as Axl strived to match the music with his visions in his head. It was later nights, we'd start at 6 or 7, Axl would want to do November Rain and Don't Cry, his songs." Now, even though Guns N' Roses opened for the Cult when they were first coming up in the late 80s, what's funny is the fortunes kind of reversed in 1993 when Guns N' Roses were the biggest band in the world and the Cult were opening for Guns across Europe towards the tail end of the Use Your Illusion tour. And at one of those shows, Matt Sorum showed up early and actually played with the Cult before Guns N' Roses went on. So obviously there was no bad blood between both of the bands. And then fast forward to the Not in This Lifetime tour, the Cult would end up opening some of the US shows. Now, since Matt Sorum left the band, he's been doing a lot of interviews, and of course Guns N' Roses almost comes up every interview he does, and he even said he's asked every day whether Guns N' Roses will reform. So he was asked by Wiki Metal, who he gave an interview to, what it was like playing with Guns N' Roses for the first time. So his first gig he ever played with was Rock in Rio. That was to about 200,000 people. And he said, "That was my first big show with the band, and it was quite an experience. Looking back in retrospect, it was a wild time, man, wild." He was then asked, "You seem like a real easygoing and down-to-earth kind of guy. How does it feel like to be in a band like Guns N' Roses when they're at the top of the world? Could you give us some perspective of how the world looks like from the top?" He said, "It was a wild time, like I said. We were one big rolling party. There was a lot of celebration going on, and we were living the life, you know. It was a decade of rock and roll bands, and we were pretty crazy in those days, but we definitely enjoyed every minute of it. We had amazing experiences. Everybody knows the history of it, and I wouldn't trade it for the world because it was crazy, and it was like at times turbulent, but in retrospect, it doesn't get any better than that. I can't say any other band in the world besides the Rolling Stones lived the way that we did." He also revealed in the interview that had Guns N' Roses not come along, that he probably would have stayed in the band The Cult. What's funny is that even though some people think there was some bad blood, at least between Matt Sorum and some of the members of The Cult, that wasn't really the case because 3 years after Matt Sorum got fired from Guns N' Roses, he once again joined The Cult and played on their Beyond Good and Evil album and even toured with the band until Velvet Revolver started up. So that does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts.